Royce Beckhardt wrote, every year on the first Thursday of May, a peculiar thing happens. The president and government officials across the nation ask us to pray. Not only do they ask us to pray, they inform us of the value of prayer and how, according to President Obama's 2012 National Day of Prayer proclamation, prayer has, quote, always been a part of the American story, and today countless Americans rely on prayer for comfort, direction, and strength, period, close quote. Of course, it's not exactly countless, since we can count millions of Americans that don't believe in the efficacy of prayer. This is a particular problem for non-religious Americans who are civically minded. Just like our religious family and friends, we want to participate in community gatherings and political events and be an accepted contributor to the diverse American tapestry. So we understandably take issue with efforts to say that the American way is the way that excludes us, especially when those efforts are driven by officials we helped to elect. As if it weren't bad enough just as a concept, the National Day of Prayer's execution makes it even worse. This national religious observance has been around since the 1950s during the McCarthy era when we took pains to distinguish ourselves from atheist communist Russia, when Congress and President Truman mandated that it occur every year. It was only relatively recently that it became such a focal point, and credit for that goes to George W. Bush, Shirley Dobson, and the National Day of Prayer Task Force, who steered the observance in a decidedly conservative direction that encourages mixing church and state. During Bush's reign, there were elaborate prayer breakfasts and ceremonies where religious values were praised. I'm going to interrupt Speckart here. If you ever take the time to Google National Day of Prayer, you will find their website looks exactly like a government website. You would swear it's a U.S. government website. It is not. It is run by Shirley Dobson, the Focus for the Family, and the rest of those lunatics. And until early last year, and I promise, I swear this is true, I saw it, in their section on how to organize your own local Day of Prayer event, it said, among other things, it said that everybody is welcome to your event. However, only evangelical Christians may be allowed to speak. So, that's where it is. Back to Speckart. This year's exclusion mirrors a recent rejection, this time from the memorial service held for victims of the Boston Marathon attacks. Those of you who don't know, Greg Epstein, the humanist chaplain, thank you, at Harvard, and the American Humanist Association, and the Humanist Institute all applied for representation at the memorial service. They applied directly to Governor Deval Patrick of Massachusetts. He ignored them, never responded, they were never invited, and you know, with over 100 people wounded, statistically, there had to be a dozen, maybe 2 dozen, maybe 3 dozen people who were injured. I don't know about the killed, there were 3 people who were non-theists. That's what now obtains in America. 1 out of 5 American adults is not associated with a religion. That is more than the Mormons, more than the Jews. They were represented, we were not. Governor Deval Patrick ignored us. And we're getting pissed. We really are, and we should be. That's why humanists around the country will be celebrating the more universal National Day of Reason on the same day as the National Day of Prayer. Blah, 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 blah. Non-praying Americans are just like praying Americans, only smarter. They want their elected officials to understand and respect them. While some government officials, like this Representative Hunter, are doing their best to extend an olive branch, too many elected leaders still willfully marginalize almost a fifth of our country's population by participating in these sectarian religious services. We should remind them that everyone should have a seat at the table and a place within the community. That's where we stand now in our day of reason, contra the day of prayer. This by way of introducing our speaker, our featured speaker, the only speaker, besides the one you can't get to shut up today, Sheila Reynoldson of Merger Watch. Until 3 weeks ago, I didn't even know what Merger Watch was. I never heard of it, didn't know anything, didn't know about the problem that it was created to address. And as a matter of fact, I'm exaggerating, this was a couple of months ago. Over the last couple of months, every time I've discussed it with people, they've said the same thing to me that I said. I didn't even know this was a problem. I didn't know anything about this. Well, it's a big problem, and it's one that, as humanists, we should care a great deal about. Sheila Reynoldson is here representing Merger Watch, and I give Sheila Reynoldson.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. This is the first time, obviously, that we're meeting as two organizations coming together, and that's something that we realize we need to do more of, because we hear this. I hear it all the time. I'm on vacation and going down the Grand Canyon, and people are like, "What? That's a problem?" I mean, when I talk about my work, we hear that again and again. So I'm happy to be here and introduce to you our work and some of the strategies that we use to combat.
Could you speak up a little bit, please?
Thank you, I will. Last year, Merger Watch turned 15 years old, and we produced a 14-minute documentary. So I'm going to show that to you first.
I was shocked. We were moving in the direction of losing women's reproductive rights.
We finally get a look tonight at the details of a proposed hospital merger.
The governor raised concerns over a religious entity taking over a publicly owned institution.
It was a little frightening for me because I didn't want to lose any of the services that I'd been so privy to all this time.
The smaller standalone community hospitals really look to consolidate with larger, stronger players in the marketplace.
The university also says it will honor the Catholic Church's rules against reproductive procedures.
I thought this is wrong, and I got a poster board and made a sign and went to the corner and stood there for probably an hour the first day.
In 1997, when two hospitals merged in New York State, one of them Catholic, one non-Catholic, women showed up at the local hospital outpatient clinic for their contraceptive appointments and were told, "Oh no, we don't do that anymore. You'll have to go somewhere else."
What seems minimal to somebody who can just get in their car and drive becomes a significant sea change for low-income communities where they don't have that option of flexible time off, where they don't have access to getting to those facilities.
We decided to get involved and figure out how can we intervene before these mergers so that the services are not lost. The mission of Merger Watch is to protect patients' rights and their access to reproductive health care when Catholic and non-Catholic hospitals are merging. Because of the economy, hospitals have been looking to merge. They're stressed financially just like families are. And when they're stressed, they're looking for ways to cut costs.
Hospitals are struggling to survive. And so they don't necessarily have the backbone to resist a Catholic hospital that can promise them economic viability in the future when that hospital says the condition for our joining with you is that you stop providing certain reproductive services. There are rules that govern the Catholic hospital which are called ERDs. ethical directives, in essence.
If a woman needs any kind of reproductive services and needs to go to a Catholic hospital, if she needs an abortion, a tubal ligation, if she needs to be engaged in a conversation about birth control, that would not be allowed in the Catholic hospital.
Tubal ligations are a way of preventing women from becoming pregnant. It's a permanent sterilization. You have the surgery one time, and then you don't have to worry about being pregnant afterwards.
We wanted to have the tubal ligation right after Junior was born. Right there at the time that he was born by C-section, I said to the doctor, aren't you able to take care of that now? And her response was, I'm sorry, I just can't because we are now in St. Peter's and I will have to do this procedure in a non-religious hospital. The body that needs to be operated on is right there, visible and available. But now you have to close it up, heal again, and then go right back and reopen the same spot. That seemed ridiculous to me.
Our job is to help educate the community about what could happen to them, what they could lose, and then help them speak up, help them have a voice, help them get in there and insist that the non-Catholic hospital preserve the services they need.
I live in a community that has 2 hospitals. It became clear that we were moving in the direction of losing women's reproductive rights if the hospitals were going to merge. And that's where Merger Watch first came onto our screen as a resource that would help us understand what was before us and the challenges.
Kingston was our first big case. On that case, we learned what do community activists need to know in order to intervene effectively.
One of the ideas that we came up together with the people from Merger Watch was putting together a big, beautiful billboard on one of the main roads that cuts through our county.
What we do is bring the real people into the regulatory setting and let them tell their own story.
All of a sudden, I found myself, this little local nurse, in Dr. Dane's office, the head official of the whole Department of Health, where I was able to have a conversation with him and say to him, as I'm saying to you today, my concerns about losing these women's reproductive services.
The state came forward and said that you two have to form some sort of partnership or one of you is going to close. And because of the cultural differences between the two, one being religious and one being non-sectarian, the state also mandated that reproductive health care services in the community cannot be lost.
The agreement developed so that we could have this building called the Foxhall Ambulatory Care Surgical Center that needed to be built in a way that would be safe and secure, as well as allow all the different reproductive services to take place in. The 2 hospitals, when they aligned, needed to keep the services separate because abortions take place in this building. And the sisters from the Benedictine Hospital objected for any services such as those to take place within the hospitals that were part of the alliance. So a whole separate building needed to be built, which cost an additional $3 million. It was a compromise, and it was one that we were willing to make.
It's a very expensive solution. The positive is the women and families in Kingston have all of the services after the merger that were available in that community before the merger. The unfortunate piece is women's health care shouldn't have to be in a separate building.
In the Troy case, Merger Watch's expertise was actually recognized and sought out by the officials of the non-Catholic hospital. So this time, the reproductive health services were not sent to the parking lot, like in Kingston. This time, they stayed inside the hospital.
Merger Watch had said that in this environment that we're in, the need to have mergers happen between secular institutions and Catholic institutions was probably going to grow across the country. And if that was going to happen, they were interested in how to make that the best possible outcome.
You can picture the number of moving parts in this merger that we're putting together. As you move one thing, it affects something else, so everything needs to be phased.
Merger Watch helped Dr. Reed and the board recognize what the stumbling blocks may be in bringing together a secular and Catholic system.
There was concern at all levels, both at St. Peter's and at Northeast Health, about how would you do this. Our discussion with Merger Watch was very helpful for us because they had the larger view as what had happened in other areas.
Hospital officials stress the merger will take years.
It was a long process of review and understanding and feeling comfortable.
So the Burdett Center is a hospital within a hospital. Although it is a separate legal entity, it's a separate hospital, it is located within a physical plant that didn't need to be completely built from the ground up. Women are able to be within one building and access all of the healthcare services that are provided in the community.
In Sierra Vista, the hospital administrators chose to be secretive about their plans, and it backfired on them.
All the docs got a phone call saying that the Board of Trustees wanted to talk to us.
We had an unscheduled meeting to announce that Sierra Vista Hospital was going to be merging temporarily with a Catholic healthcare system in Tucson. Most of us who'd practiced in the Catholic healthcare systems were pretty upset because we knew that that was going to create an issue for sterilizations, and none of the obstetricians were consulted prior to this announcement.
I was just fit to be tied. Angry, felt like this was an attack on the women of this community. There was no other place for women to get health care. It had to be done here.
When Dr. Silva called our office, he was distraught. We suggested a letter written by all the OBGYNs in the community, an open letter to the hospital to let them know how you feel about this.
We decided to do a newspaper ad. That ad is what really kicked us off and got us going.
This is just wrong. What can we do?
We said, we're getting involved. This is too big a thing, and it is not the right thing for this community. And we were also concerned about the end-of-life directives.
I went on their website and looked at their ethical policies, and on any decision you could possibly come to, they say, unless it violates Catholic principles as we see them. So it's include the family, but if we don't like the family's decision, we don't have to go by it.
We decided to picket, and we set up a picket schedule that we updated every week to make sure that people were covering it and that nobody covered it by themselves.
I've been walking on the picket line all the livelong day.
Most of us were 70 plus. It really struck me that in my 70th year, I would feel so strongly about something that I had to speak up.
There were people out protesting almost every single day, Monday through Friday, for an entire year.
We were trying to get the attention of the board members, and it was very frustrating.
Charlie, blow your horn.
There was a palpable depression among the obstetrical staff and among the doctors, and as well as the nursing staff, because we all knew that we were doing things that we didn't feel were in the best interest of the patients.
I believe a turning point for our community with this possible merger was when a woman locally was miscarrying twins. And she had already miscarried one at home and came to the hospital in dire need.
And Dr. Holder, and the person on call, had to decide what to do.
We had discussed the management plan to help her finish her delivery. I hesitate to call it delivery, it was finishing a miscarriage. And then I was informed that we couldn't complete her miscarriage because there was still a heartbeat on the fetus. We had to explain we had to transfer her to Tucson because her local community hospital, which medically obviously could take care of the problem, now because of this Catholic Church affiliation could not take care of her problem.
To have to travel 100 miles to Tucson for a facility was threatening the mother and certainly stressing a family.
It was just a very gut-wrenching thing to have to put the staff through, put the patient through, obviously.
So we had been told that we wouldn't have a problem with dealing with miscarriages, which is what this was. And it turned out not to be true.
I suspect that that pressure, plus the financial changes with the loss of business, seeing protesters out in front of your hospital every day, sort of created a enough pressure on the hospital that they realized that this was never going to be a long-term acceptable solution to this community.
Somebody yelled at me as I got out of my car, "It's over." And I said, "What's over?" They said, "The affiliation, the hospital." And I just started yelling. I was just ecstatic.
Merger Watch brought us so much information.
Every day I call them.
We would never have gone as far and as fast without them, I'm sure.
Merger Watch is a very unique voice that was needed and came at the perfect time.
They come to the table with options, and they come to the table with a level of expertise that nobody else can really offer.
Merger Watch is protecting all of us.
Why do we have religious hospitals to begin with in this country? Obviously, these hospitals were established at a time when we were a much more religious society, to ensure that patients of faiths could have access to important rituals, and to help Catholic and Jewish doctors specifically find a place of employment, because they were discriminated against in other settings. And obviously, for some faiths, it is important to provide health care. So the Catholic tradition has a very rich history of establishing health care where no health care existed before across this country. Today, Catholic hospitals look very different than they did when they were first established, right? So as we become more secularized, these hospitals look very, very different. They serve patients of all faiths or no faiths at all. They employ physicians and staff of all faiths and no faith at all. They rely heavily on public funding, just like any other acute care hospital in this country, 30 to 50% Medicaid and Medicare in government funding for research. And they're licensed to serve the general public. And increasingly, as I will talk about, they are entering partnerships with secular hospitals. It's just because it's just an industry-wide situation where hospitals are consolidating as community demographics change. We have too many hospital beds, and hospitals have been consistently consolidating since the early 90s. Today we have a situation where 60% of the hospitals in the United States are for nonprofit entities. The other are public and for-profit entities. And of those nonprofit entities, 7 of the 10 largest nonprofit health systems are religious, and 6 of those 7 are Catholic. They're huge. These are huge systems, 81 hospitals, 76 hospitals, 49 hospitals. They were smart. They started consolidating amongst themselves first, and it gave them a leg up when hospital consolidation across the spectrum started to really take off. They were already big when consolidation started to really happen. In the last 3 years, we have seen a high number of hospital mergers again, just like we did in the mid-90s. So mid-90s, we spiked and then kind of leveled off in the early 2000s, and then now, since the recession, really, 2008 recession, we are seeing a lot of hospital merger activity. There's decrease in reimbursement rates, tight credit due to the recession continues. Hospitals are looking for added leverage in contract negotiations for insurance companies. And there are many incentives offered by healthcare reform, the Affordable Care Act, to encourage hospitals to deliver coordinated, more efficient care. And so obviously a subset of all of these hospital mergers may include secular and religious hospitals coming together. And they pose challenges in reconciling different hospital missions, ethics, and services. And when one of those partnering Catholic hospitals is religiously affiliated, its leadership may demand that the merged entity adopt the religious rules of that entity, of the healthcare, the doctrine of that hospital. Catholic secular mergers pose the biggest ethical conflicts because Catholic hospitals follow what's known as the ethical and religious directives for Catholic health care services. This is a list that was published in the 1970s. It's been revised a few times. It's on its 5th revision by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. And they're enforced by bishops in the Vatican. The bishops are responsible for enforcing those rules within their own diocese. They're applied to more than 600 Catholic hospitals and 50 HMOs in the United States. And they are, again, imposed on secular hospitals that merge with Catholic facilities or are managed by Catholic health systems. I'm not going to go into all of those. I'll call them ERDs sometimes, or I'll call them the directives for short. I'm not going to go into every single directive, but I'll give you an overview of how they affect healthcare. You may think that it might just be abortion or women's health services, and it is disproportionately does affect those women's health services. But it does other things as well. I'll go through these. Contraception services and counseling are not allowed in a Catholic hospital. Emergency contraception for sexual assault survivors are not allowed in Catholic hospitals. If there is a state law, like there is in New York, you are mandated to give emergency contraception to rape victims in the ER in this state. But some Catholic hospitals may impose a little layer of bureaucracy there and do a pregnancy test first, or an ovulation test first before they administer the drug. Tubal ligations and vasectomies. Sterilization is not allowed in a Catholic hospital. The ban on abortion is an obvious one, but it can affect the prompt and appropriate treatment of pregnancy emergencies, like ectopic pregnancies and miscarriage management. Because if there's a heartbeat present, they cannot do the standard of care and terminate that very much wanted pregnancy, but is no longer a viable pregnancy. If there's a heartbeat present, they will delay or transfer the patient. Safer sex counseling, condom use is frowned upon by the Catholic Church, as you may know. So you're not going to get good comprehensive counseling in a Catholic hospital. Infertility treatments are not allowed. So that's not commonly found in a hospital setting. It'll be in a doctor's office or an outpatient clinic. But if those doctor offices and clinics get acquired by the Catholic system, if that's part of the deal, then those offices can no longer provide these kind of services. The honoring of patients' end-of-life wishes. Since the Terry Schiavo case, you remember all of that, the Catholic bishops have actually beefed up the directive about keeping somebody alive in a vegetative state. You cannot honor end-of-life wishes in a Catholic hospital sufficiently. And contraception coverage for employees. You may be aware of the Affordable Care Act and the promise that the hospitals and Catholic hospitals and universities must cover their employees' contraception coverage. Fingers crossed that does finally go through, despite the 42 lawsuits that are pending. I'm not going to go into that right now, but we have seen employees lose their contraception coverage when their secular hospital employer merged with a Catholic entity. That means not having money to pay for a sterilization. So you're left with employees having to save money to cover a very common operation. It's very frustrating. These are the principles that kind of guide our work, and I have to keep going back to these to remind, because I get really in the weeds with contractual language and public policy language and really deep analysis of some of these language agreements. And it's important for me to stop and think back to what we're doing in our work. The welfare of the patient must be at the center of medical decision-making and treatment. And the beliefs of a caretaker or religious doctrine of a healthcare institution cannot be allowed to obstruct a patient's access to care. And patients must be able to make treatment decisions based on accurate medical information and their own ethical and religious beliefs. So Merger Watch was created in 1997, up in Albany, New York, actually. Lois Utley, she's the current director, she's the founder of Merger Watch, was working at Family Planning Advocates of New York State when a woman called and said, I can't get birth control at my local clinic anymore. I've always gone there to get it, and now they're telling me I can't get it anymore because that clinic had been bought out by a Catholic hospital. It shocked Lois, and she had never heard of this problem before, just like John was saying. And this was right at the peak, right when the hospital consolidation was really starting to peak. That is what started Merger Watch. So it became a project within Family Planning Advocates, and she then moved the project down to New York State in 2006, I believe. We have worked on over 115 cases in 38 states. We have successfully stopped 32 mergers. We have undone more than a dozen mergers that were already completed, and we were able to undo them. And we have reached compromises in 23 cases. And I'll go into what those compromises look like in 1 minute. They are creative solutions where the merger went through, the services were dropped, but they weren't lost. We were able to come up with a way to preserve local access to services. The strategies that we used were described in the movie. We try to defeat mergers. That's the the goal. That's really what we'd love to do. Is just stop the merger, find another partner. There are other partners out there that are not going to be imposing religious restrictions on the community. Let's try to do that first. We've had some great success. Sierra Vista, Arizona, a 2-year trial affiliation between the only hospital in town. The next closest acute care was in Tucson, 80 miles away. And the board had closed meetings and sprung it upon the community and the staff that we are now affiliated with Carondelet. Carondelet is a Catholic health system based in Tucson. And they were going to try a 2-year affiliation, two-year trial affiliation, and the ERDs, the ethical directives, would be in place. The community was surprised, and the staff, especially the OBGYNs, were enraged. They knew what this meant, that women would no longer be able to get tubal ligations. A large retiree community there were very nervous about their end-of-life wishes not being honored, and they sprung into action. It was mostly Unitarians, actually, an older group, about mostly 70 plus in their years, a group of about 15, and I worked with them on the phone for a year. We worked diligently together, coming up with different strategies and ways, tracking, waiting for the stories to start coming out. So the outpatient clinic stopped providing birth control, and then we were able to get patient affidavits, doctor affidavits, and donor affidavits. Donors were very upset that their money was being used not the way they had intended. When they made a donation to the hospital, they now realized that their money was being used in a restrictive manner, got affidavits from them, and we sent in a complaint to the state AG and waited. And during our wait, a woman had suffered a miscarriage. She was carrying twins, and she lost a twin at home and came into the emergency room for treatment. The doctors described to the patient and her husband that the protocol, the second fetus was not going to survive, and described to them the termination that was going to be now given to them. He quickly made a phone call to the hospital administration to let them know that he was doing this, and the administration said no. She had to be transferred 80 miles away to Tucson for a treatment that could have happened at her local hospital. But because of this affiliation with the Catholic system, they no longer were allowed to do that. And this is after being told, the doctors had been told that treating miscarriages would be okay. In fact, they had put out a newspaper ad, the hospital did, listing all the services that would still be available to the community, and it included the miscarriage, treating miscarriage. So we sent that newspaper ad with an affidavit from the attending doctor, and it added that to the AG complaint. 2 months later, the affiliation fell apart. The AG was starting to do an investigation, and the affiliation fell apart. So that's just an example of defeating a merger. A quick story, sorry, I don't want to take too much time on details like that, but that communities that stick at it and really, are diligent about fighting back, they were able to do that in Arizona. I have other examples, but I'm not going to go into too many of them today. When we realize that the merger is going to go through, we try to come up with creative solutions that will at least preserve the services that the community has always been privy to, that they've always wanted to have, they've always been expected of their local hospital. And we have done well. In Kingston, New York, we helped establish an ambulatory surgery center when Kingston's only 2 hospitals, Benedictine and Kingston, were actually mandated by the state. I don't know if you remember this, about 4 or 5 years ago, the Berger Commission mandated, they did a downsizing of all the hospitals in New York State, and a number of hospitals were mandated to merge. So we knew we weren't going to win that merger, so we came up with this creative solution to at least preserve the services that would have been lost otherwise. That is a second-tier solution. We're not we're not too happy with the results in Kingston. Ambulatory Surgery Center is not financially solvent, and it's not so, ends up being a competitor to the hospital, so the hospital's not going to really have a lot of incentive to keep that ambulatory surgery center alive and thriving. So that solution is not something we do much with anymore. We're just not comfortable with promoting it anymore. A better solution is hospital within a hospital. We have an example of this in Troy, New York, when St. Peter's Health System and Good Samaritan and St. Mary's all merged together. The hospital administration of the Secular Hospital is very wonderful to work with. They actually reached out to us ahead of time and said, we want to make sure that this works out the way so that it's really successful. What do we need to be aware of? What concerns should we be aware of so we make sure that this works? And it was a pleasure to work with them. What they did was create a maternity hospital, a condo-style hospital on the 3rd floor of the Secular Hospital. And they put all maternity from St. Mary's and Good Samaritan into that floor. And it's separately incorporated, separately funded, separate board, separate staff. That is able to preserve all reproductive health services, whereas the rest of the hospital is now under the directives. The only thing that is not allowed is abortion, and that was okay with that hospital because they only did about 17 a year, and they have really good alternative providers around the area, in Albany especially at the hospital. It also doesn't address end-of-life care. There's really no carve-out solution, it's another way of describing this, for end-of-life care. So there's that risk of like, well, we were able to save many services, but there's still a concern, and we shared those concerns with the administration, and they felt confident that there was no shenanigans going on. So we wait and monitor and hopefully not hear of a story, but we do still remain quite aware that we can't save every service, or we can't guarantee that this is a foolproof solution. And then the last one, I'll just quickly jump down to dropping the ERDs from a Catholic hospital being acquired by a non-Catholic buyer. Sometimes you have a struggling Catholic hospital. Actually, New Jersey is in the middle of this. There's about 5 Catholic hospitals that are really struggling. And when a buyer comes, or a potential bidder comes to make a proposal, they will put a condition on that agreement, that if you acquire us, you have to promise that you'll always keep the directives in place. And most buyers just say yes, without another thought. It really surprises us. This did not happen up in Montefiore. Montefiore about, is it 7 years ago? 6-7 years ago? They were actually encouraged by the state to acquire Our Lady of, I'm forgetting the name of the hospital. I'll remember in a minute. It's a Catholic hospital that was struggling, very close to Montefiore. And Montefiore has a rich history of being, a lot of Jewish board members. It has a rich history of being a Jewish hospital. And so they actually were like, yeah, we'll acquire them, we'll take them over, but we're not going to keep the ERDs. That's not going to happen. It was a non-starter. And so what they did instead was sunset the directives very respectfully. They allowed their directives to stay in place for 3 years, and then they quietly introduced comprehensive services, quietly removed the statue of St. Mary out of the front lobby and removed the decor. And now that that building is now a division of Montefiore, and service, full OBGYN services are in that building, and there's nobody, and that's what the diocese agreed to. They really had no other choice, but it's a solution that we now actively promote. So we get ahead of the game and try to get in and talk to the secular buyer and say, you know what, you actually don't have to say yes to that condition, and we ask you to allow this acquisition to be an opportunity to expand services in a community that may not have great access to begin with. Wouldn't it be great if this hospital could offer comprehensive services? So it's just another one of our strategies that we use. Community mobilization is our #1 mission in our organization. We work with a lot of grassroots organizers, advocacy organizations if they're available, to make the community aware of what's coming down the pike. So when a hospital, a secular religious hospital merger is introduced to the community, the first newspaper article that you usually read is pretty much the press release of the hospitals. They paint a very rosy picture. This is good for our community. We would never be able to survive without it. And so it's an uphill battle initially to get the community on board that this is going to be a problem, really a big problem. So let's educate the community. So if you can get a group of 3 or 4 in a community to take that on, you can really go far. But we can't do it without that on the ground support. We're aware of 15 mergers right now that we would love to be involved with. There's maybe 4 or 5 that we are able to get on the ground support and start campaigns. So it's impossible to do our work without on the ground support. They do great work educating the public through public forums. They get meetings with secular hospital officials. We assist them with letters to the editor. If there is a state review process, we help them submit written and oral testimony to describe the importance of maintaining access to certain services, and then of course, helping them get ready to give oral testimony if possible at the public hearings. If the providers of that secular hospital whose practices are in trouble, are at risk, if they hear this groundswell of community opposition, they have more courage to come forward and say that they're ethical, to voice their own ethical position. And it's really a strong advocacy technique to see in the paper a doctor say, I would not be happy practicing in a hospital where accepted medical procedures are restricted. I love what I do. They're stating their own ethical position very forcefully. We wish to give patients the best care we can, and that's what it's all about. So to be restricted by a religious or political belief that is not mine, I do not feel that was a right choice. The person who makes that decision is someone else who puts their belief systems and their ethics on me and my patients, which I just don't think is right. All 3 of these doctors live in communities that we were able to defeat the mergers. And I don't think it's a coincidence. I think when people read that in the paper, they're like, oh yeah, that ethical position counts. It's really important. So it's one of my favorite things to do is get the providers to feel comfortable with stepping forward and taking a stand. Not always easy, because there's a risk there. They don't want to lose their jobs. They have privileges at this hospital. They may lose them. So it's not common, but when it happens, it's very powerful. There's regulatory interventions that we do, if we can. I think it's 38. See, I should have checked that before I came here. Certificate of Need is a state law in about 38 to 40 states that allows the state to review hospital transactions before they go through. So in a number of states, we have a review process for hospitals that are either affiliating or merging or acquisition or new construction. And we have one in New York, and it's actually quite good in New York. That being said, there's a number of states that have certificate of need process that's not very strong. It doesn't allow community members to come in and have their voices heard. And then, of course, we have a number of states, a lot in the South, that have no review at the state level. This review process is a great intervention point for consumers to come in and say, we demand that the preservation of services be part of this, be put on this agreement as a condition of approval. And it has worked to our benefit in New York State in a number of cases. And it's something that is needed in every state, but it's not available in every state. It's unfortunate. And in fact, nationally, the trend is to weaken these CON laws. It's a free market thing. Like if a lot of business owners don't want their state agencies telling them what to do. We also have the state AG process that we can approach, like I described in the Arizona case. Charitable trust arguments, like I described, where a donor is disappointed to hear that the money that they gave to the hospital is now being used for restrictive care. You actually have some protections at the state level for that kind of egregious situation. And then the Federal Trade Commission has become more active lately because of so many hospital transactions that are a result of or taking advantage of healthcare reform initiatives. They are starting to pay more attention to hospital mergers in general. So we're starting to see them to be more of a possibility for intervening and at least slowing down a hospital merger case. A lot of these cases take months, 6 to 18 months. And one of our strategies is to actually slow it down. And if you can slow it down long enough, they tend to fall apart. So the FTC is another avenue for doing that. These are some of the recent merger cases that we've had big victories. Louisville, Kentucky, Abington, Pennsylvania, and Waterbury, Connecticut. Each one was different. Kentucky and Connecticut both involved the governor's office. Big players in those. And then Abington, Pennsylvania was the fastest case we ever had. It was 3 weeks long. The community was livid about this. And they took to, again, an older population, progressive community outside Philadelphia. And they took to social media and shut the thing down in 3 weeks. So this is my list of current cases up on my wall. If you have any relatives, friends, anybody in these communities who would be interested in hearing more about this, please send them my way. I'd be happy to talk to them. Maybe they have some inside information that I could use. Our newest case is in Houston, Texas, where a 4-hospital system is being taken over by a huge Catholic system. And then Washington State is my other one that's just eating up a lot of my time. Washington State is going through a huge amount of secular religious hospital mergers at the moment. And it's ironic. It's ironic because they're a very progressive state. They have excellent policies, not only for reproductive rights, but end-of-life care. And same-sex marriage was just passed there. And it's ironic because they're one of the least Catholic states. In fact, they're the states with the most what am I trying to say? Secular. Most secular state in the Union, right? Yes, yes. So they are basically freaking out. They can't believe that they are being put in a position. It just also happens to have 3 of the 5 largest healthcare systems in that state are Catholic. And I was just out there all week this week, working with a wide, broad coalition: ACLU, Planned Parenthood, NARAL, PFLAG, which is Parents and Families of Lesbian and Gays.
And a high state minimum wage.
And a high state minimum wage. I didn't know that.
Higher than most other states.
I didn't know that.
And their economy.
And interesting update: high percentage of progressive huge employers, Amazon, Starbucks, some of the really large employers that are actually really progressive. So we've been actually educating the large employers about this issue. The whole northwest quadrant of the state is 100% under Catholic. The beds, the hospital beds are all under control by the Catholic hospitals. It's shocking. So we've been working on state strategies there in addition to what I call whack-a-mole advocacy, where you're dealing with each individual transaction as fires flame up, but also trying to figure out a statewide strategy for that state. So big stuff going on out there. That's the end of my presentation. We're right up the river. We're actually right next to Riverside Church. Come visit us. And, yes, sir.
Yeah, hi. One quick question and one
not
so quick. The first quick question is, where does your financial support come from?
That's a good question. We're foundation driven. Robert Sterling Clark, right up on the Upper East Side here. Robert Sterling Clark has supported our work for years. The Ford Foundation supports our work, and the American Education Fund of America up in Connecticut.
Yeah, and the little longer question is, there must be places where the governor, right, is very anti-abortion and birth control and condoms and all, right? All of that. What happens? You go down in flames, or what happens?
You're right. If you don't see a friendly actor, you're not going to go for that. You know, you're not going to enact his help. So you you look elsewhere.
So how many of those are winning? Are you losing? Or are they winning because you can't go in?
Right, yeah. They'll win if we can't get on the ground support. And they'll win if the community feels like this is our only chance for saving our community hospital. We're just going to have to go with it. More than legislative techniques, we don't really use legislation or engage the governor unless it's a friend. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's...
Well, I'm curious how
to work in an anti-choice state.
How much is out there that you can't really deal with?
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not passing by. I'm not watching a lot of cases just go, oh, we lost that one. No, we lost. I mean, we really do take some time to engage in these cases. The states that are, Kentucky, that's not a friendly state for women at all.
Thinking, yeah.
And we had a big win there because it was a public hospital. So they were proposing to put a separate but equal facility for services that would have been lost in that public hospital. And the governor and the AG said no because of the church-state situation. They were like, no, we cannot have a Catholic system wiping out services in a public facility. Even if it's separate, it's not good enough. We got very lucky there. So I don't know. I'm not sure if I answered that question thoroughly, but go ahead. Sure.
What is the problem with the end of life thing? Because I understood from Catholic school that we didn't have to take extraordinary measures. Catholics were not expected to live on if it was an extraordinary measure. So why is this becoming an issue now?
The Terry Schiavo case was huge. I mean, that just blew up in everybody's face, right? So they really clamped down on the idea that if you're in a vegetative state, we have to keep you. That's basic care. Giving you a tube is basic care to them, and that's baseline for a Catholic hospital. They will not remove feeding tubes, even though the family wishes you to.
It never was before. I mean,
It got more strict. It got more conservative. Yeah.
It used to be the most progressive end-of-life policy. I worked in long-term care.
Okay.
And it was, and then the change did come like almost overnight.
It really did, yeah. In October 2009.
To where we would medicate for pain, like no pain. That was our goal. So you were very generous with morphine,
the medication,
which
yes.
would, quicken, hasten.
Yes, yes.
And I know I was part of having feeding tubes removed. That had some of them had been in for years, and then all of a sudden, it was they would never be removed. Yeah.
So what happens?
Overnight.
Yeah, overnight. And then, so what happened to those patients?
Ellen
Did they have
says
to?
she's a nurse.
Yes.
Yeah.
So did the patients get transferred, or did the care just? I mean, what?
Well, the families at that point are over a barrel, so they just accept.
Wow.
They're over a barrel because it's a tremendous burden on a family. Yeah. It's hard to realize for people who haven't been in that situation, but it's a tremendous burden on the whole family to have somebody in that situation.
Yes. And it's very hard to find stories, end-of-life stories like this, because it's traumatic. And so when their loved ones do end up passing away, it's very rare for them to come forward and want to be an advocate and expose these stories. It's very hard to find these stories.
And actually, in fact, I think that the most progressive written statement by Rome is still the written statement, but not their practice.
Right. So
and
this
I think
is.
It might have come in with Ratzinger overnight.
Well, we hear this quite often. That like, well, they're the rules, but they're breaking them all the time. It's really no big deal. Well, it becomes a big deal when the religious system is merging with a secular one, and the secular one wants to understand what the rules. Wait, so you're saying we have to follow the rules, but we don't have to follow the rules? I don't understand. Where is it in writing? Can you get it in writing? It becomes the spotlight on these restrictions becomes very glaring to the Catholic partner, and they don't like it. But you know what? Too bad.
But also,
we need to know what these
secular
restrictions
law
are.
in this country favors the Catholic Church in particular and all religions in particular. They have privileges that Catholic churches aren't covered by, or any religious by ERISA, so which protects our pensions. Like a lot of us who work in the religious healthcare system maybe wouldn't do it if we knew that,
Does anyone have a question? They have to leave soon. I just want to. Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to find out, how do you get involved with your organization?
We have a mailing list that you can ask for through info@MergerWatch. It's really just a matter of staying in touch through that we have our supporters.
And I have one other.
Yes.
Okay. And I used to live in Austin, Texas.
Oh, yes, so
and
you
I'm
know
a
the
nurse
Seton
as well,
case.
and I know Seton, and I worked for St. David's, and I remember at the time that I was there, which was like from 91 to 2001, they acquired Brackenridge Hospital.
Yes, and they put the hospital within the hospital.
That's right, because the nurses that did tubal ligations would clock out of their own cost center and clock into the
And the
secular.
Vatican didn't like that.
Yeah, and I don't know exactly what happened, but I was
They created a
interested-
hospital within a hospital
Okay.
successfully, and then state funding, which was run by medical branch,
Okay.
and then funding got cut on the state level. Thank you very much. What's his name? The governor.
Oh, yeah.
And
Harry.
And that hospital has been swallowed up by Seton, and so women who need tubal ligations, who are go to that safety net hospital, now have to go to St. David's.
St. David's, that's right. Yep. And is
So that's
why
a
you
solution
had
that
Austin
should have
up
been. It was a great solution, but it got axed because of funding. Very fun. So all of these creative solutions are financially, not stable. Go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, I know that most Catholic women use birth control just like women.
Yes.
And there's an organization, Catholics for Free Choice.
Catholics for Choice,
Are
yes.
they involved in
We
this?
do employ, yes. Once in a while, when there's a case where there's a large Catholic population in that community, we will bring in Catholics for Choice as the coalition
And
member.
they are affiliated with you, they help you.
Yes. Oh yeah, we do great work together. Yes, sir.
Yeah, do you ever find pushback from the hospital staff, the doctors who have lived in a secular world and practiced their Hippocratic oath
Yes.
the way they feel they have to?
Like I was
should?
describing, yes, it's great to find a doctor who's willing to take a stand, but it's rare to find
Well,
them because
it
they're
is.
nervous. They don't want to lose their privileges. It's very tricky, but yes, it's wonderful when we do find those doctors who are saying, no, it's important for us to
You
be
mean
vocal.
there's very few principled doctors?
No, they're principled. They're just they have jobs to keep. I don't judge them for that. I really don't.
I was curious, when in all the mergers that you mentioned a lot of the systems are Catholic, but
Yes.
are they predominantly the dominant partner in most of these mergers?
Yes, are the Catholic ones the ones
They're the
making
ones
them
buying?
making that? Yeah.
Are there other
They're-
religious groups involved? Or do we just-
There's Lutheran, there's Baptist, there's Jewish, there's
Presbyterian.
there's
Well, like
Presbyterian.
Mormons who have many beliefs that are,
No, it's the Catholics happen to. There's 16% of the hospital beds in this country are owned by Catholics.
So they're the ones doing most of the acquisitions.
Yeah, and they just happen to be the ones with the most egregious restrictions.
Why is that?
They've been in healthcare for a long time, and like I described, that they started consolidating ahead of everybody else.
But you're saying even if they're the junior partner, for example, maybe
Oh.
the secular organization is not being on the ball enough to restrict the ERDs, is that what you seem to be saying before, that's, or if they're being taken over, if a secular operation is being taken over, they're just gonna go like this?
Before they can even sign one paper, they have to agree to the condition that they'll take on the ERDs.
And they're not strong enough to say no.
That's what we're working on. I mean, that's really the mission of our organization, saying you don't have to say, let's back up a little bit here. Did you really look at the demographics of your community? Can you really afford to, can a community really afford to lose these services? That's kind of the mission of our organization, to slow these things down and say, no, this is not good. There are some affiliation agreements that only take on 2 or 3 restrictions. Are we happy with that? I don't know. It's usually abortion, euthanasia, and infertility treatments.
If they don't go along, there's no one else to buy them, they face either take the ERDs or you're out of business, is that it?
It's more, what happens is that a hospital that's struggling will put out an RFP, a request for proposals. They'll get 5 bidders, they'll get 5 proposals back, and they review them all. It's the one that gives them the best deal that we're gonna go for. And if it means you have to take the ERDs on, I guess we'll do that. It's kind of that attitude. Not all boards act like that. Some boards don't like that. They really don't. No, we're not gonna take on religious so you get a very wide variety of reactions to that.
So I used to work for the Salvation Army at hospitals, which went out of business, they closed their stuff.
went to another area. But I know that in the Union, you know, a lot of Catholic hospitals closed. You know, St Vincent, St John's around here, various other ones. So, and then some of them were transferred into like condos. You know, the buildings.
Yes.
So the
business.
strategy then, you're saying, seems to be consolidate among ourselves and then have the merger. So they look to expand in the United States, like as opposed to the Salvation Army, which was diminishing, of course, in the United States. You're saying the Catholic hospitals are alive and well and trying to expand in the healthcare industry.
I'm saying that the strongest nonprofit health systems in this country happen to be Catholic. And in order to they want to stay relevant as a business and increase their market share and make good investments. It's business. It's a business move. And and they're not being run by nuns anymore. These are suits running these organizations. And they just happen to have their feet in Catholic mud. And there is no way to convince them, only one system has done this, to convince them to, why don't you step away from the church and just be a nonprofit? The tradition of healthcare and Catholicism is just too strong. They'll never do it. Only one system has done that. Catholic Healthcare West, 2 years ago, turned into Dignity Health. They removed themselves from the Catholic Church. There's no longer any bishop oversight, but they still have their feet in Catholic mud. They still have Catholic hospitals that maintain the restrictions, and then they have secular hospitals in their system that take on those three restrictions I mentioned: abortion, euthanasia, and infertility. My point being, it's just a business move. You know, this is a business move, and it just happens to be.
Closing hospitals, you know, you figure that you're going to lose some people to other things, to other areas, but in fact, they're putting the resources for closing the hospitals, making money there, selling the building, and then trying to put the strong arm on secular hospitals. So it's in one way seemingly diminishing, but in another way overtaking what else is there.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
Taking over other things that are there.
Yeah.
You know, one thing I've wondered about, you know, if you're pregnant, right, and the husband and the wife would rather have the wife would rather have her own life preserved, and if there was a danger in this. A lot of people would feel that way. Is there any information given out in communities that would pressure the hospitals? And hospitals are always advertising we're the best place, this, that, and the other thing. Is there any way to let the people in an area, in a city, especially where there's competition, know that if you go to this hospital, this
and this could happen? Yeah. If there's a choice in the community, most OBGYNs, within that example, will have privileges in 2 hospitals. And they'll just make it short, you know, they'll communicate to their patient, if you want a tubal ligation or, you know, after your cesarean, we're going to deliver at this hospital, not the Catholic one. Or if something comes up in your pregnancy, I'm going to encourage you to go to this emergency room and not this one. But if there's no choice in the community, that's a big problem.
What's the story with St. Luke's, Roosevelt, for example?
That's not Catholic. It's yeah, no, it's not. It's a secular hospital.
Yeah, do you find that sometimes the religious hospitals will take punitive steps against physicians who might, for example, have privileges elsewhere and will exercise proper medical ethics elsewhere?
Elsewhere, yeah, they're not allowed to do that unless they're employed by the hospital. If they have privileges, they're free to do what they want off campus.
No, they're free, but that doesn't mean that a religious hospital can't do punitive things with them, right?
They can't.
Kick them out.
Only if they're employees of that hospital can they make the demand that you cannot do any restricted services.
You can make a demand, but I'm saying that's like actually, you know, legally saying it. Can you do it without legally saying it? In other words, I'd like to know if doctors are being
punished for providing a comprehensive health care elsewhere outside of the Catholic hospital. Yeah. I do not have any examples of that particular scenario.
Or even just being politically active.
I have examples of doctors being punished for providing birth control at their offices after that office had been acquired by a Catholic system. They
Well,
were
that's something
kicked out.
different,
They were
yeah.
kicked out of their offices. So, yeah, it does happen.
Okay.
Do you see the motivation behind this trend? Either economic or proselytization?
Economic. I'm in the economic
I mean,
camp.
so Catholics aren't really trying to force this on us. It's their
The
their
bishops
deal.
are not in these transaction deals. When
Yeah.
these talks start between two systems, the bishop is nowhere in sight.
Have you tried
The bishop
working
is
on
asked
it at all?
for a blessing. Can you bless this transaction? And then when the actual agreement is written up, they go back to the bishop and
So
say,
it's really
"Do
is
we
econ-
have-"
it's really
It's
economic.
business.
Yeah.
I'm very much in that camp. There are people out there that feel another way that
But
I
abortion
can't
would be
buy.
good business, you know, so if they don't give abortion, doesn't make economic sense.
Yes.
Between her and her mother, and fortunately her mother did survive, but they were going to save her instead. Does that still hold? Are Catholic hospitals still choosing the baby's life
Yes.
over the mother's?
I don't know if anyone's heard of that Phoenix, Arizona case where a nun on the ethics committee was part of the decision to
We wrote it
allow,
up in the newsletter.
yes, allow an abortion for a woman who had a terrible heart condition that was going to kill her. And they needed to perform an abortion. Right, the pregnancy was going to kill her. And so this nun was part of the ethics committee that said, provide the service. The bishop came down hard on that nun. She was threatened with excommunication. I believe she was never fully excommunicated, but that's just besides the point. And that hospital has since lost its Catholic status. And I think they just shrugged. They're like, fine. Because they were really, they all stood behind that nun. They really stood behind the ethics committee on that decision. But it's an example of them taking a hard line, the bishop wanting to take a hard line. That exists. The bishops, when they take a hard line, it's usually they want to be noticed by Vatican. It's very political, much a political game. So we tend to, when we take on a new case, we always check in, what's your bishop like? And if he's a hardliner, then he is definitely going to be involved with, how the local hospitals are interpreting their ERDs, and will make any kind of creative solution idea very difficult to obtain.
How does it work that Catholic hospitals get public funding, just like
I've been
other
waiting for that
hospitals?
question. I thought for
And-
sure somebody would ask that.
And yet they can restrict the
Yeah.
services
Catholic hospitals get public funding.
Yeah.
with the same public funding that regular hospitals.
Yeah.
Yeah, how do they, what's the loophole, or how do they do that?
We've always been a country that respects freedom of religion, and they have special rights.
Okay.
I mean, that is the tradition in this country. So it's an excellent question. It's a very popular position. You always see it in the comment section after an article about concerns of a religious, secular, if it comes up in the press, you always see someone comment on this. I'm not a lawyer, but yes, there are exemptions for religion in every step of the way for hospitals. And I will say that every hospital is not mandated to provide every single service. So if a hospital decides to drop tubal ligations, there are no laws to say you can't do that. It's a bummer.
Well, I would think that if you could reduce that public funding, or like
Put conditions on it?
In other words, say your tax exemption would be reduced by the dollar amount that it will cost to have that procedure performed
Elsewhere. It's a good point. Yeah.
You could say, well, it would be a road they wouldn't want to travel down, and certainly be a strategy for.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, Massachusetts, if I'm not mistaken, restricts public funding for hospitals
That are
don't
religious? Really?
allow, that have religious restrictions.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm going to have to look into that.
Yes.
Because
It's a recently, in fact, they discussed that on Meet the Press today.
Oh, really? Okay, I'll have to.
That's how
look at that.
Where the.
I wonder if it's related to their health care reform law, something in the law.
Where I think it was Richard Lowry, who was a conservative, because they broached that situation, and he claimed they're restricting religious freedom. Because they're not going to give public funding to institutions that promote, certain religious values, which restricts the general public.
Wow, I'm very curious about that. I want to look into that. Thank you for mentioning it.
That's maybe coming.
Maybe, and maybe something Washington State could use, so I'll look into that for sure.
I don't know how far it's gonna go, but.
If the newest federal bills, Obamacare, is a model from Massachusetts.
It is.
And the same problem is running into with Obamacare. It probably comes out of that original.
Yeah.
Very possible.
Original bill, yeah. Does anyone else have any questions? Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.